Exactly, that works. I'm going to stand on the stage and take a picture for our Facebook page. And happens on Facebook. I heard they would sign this photo. Anybody gives you a bad time, they have to go through me. Maybe I'll take it. I have a thick skin.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our town hall event the Chumstick Wildfire Stewardship Coalition is presenting. I'm John Callahan with the coalition, and tonight I would like to thank everybody in this room for showing up. It's important. Fire is a big deal around here, and we have two very good speakers to educate us on the subject. So to start the evening, I'd like to introduce our Public Lands Commissioner, Dave Upthegrove. Dave?
Thank you. Good evening. You know, in early September of 2020, a young family from the city of Renton, they were actually my constituents as a county council member at the time, packed up their truck and fled into the night. A wildfire sparked in the hills of Okanagan County was moving fast, too fast. Jacob and Jamie Highland had taken their one-year-old son, Uriel, on a weekend trip to their family's property near Omak. When the Cold Springs fire exploded, they had no time. Their truck was found days later, burned, stuck, and abandoned in the ash. Jamie had used the last of her strength to carry her baby Uriel down a ravine in search of water. When rescuers found them, both parents were alive, barely. Uriel was not. 1 year old, gone. That fire didn't just devastate the forests of central Washington. It reached all the way into the heart of our communities, into homes, into lives, and in this case, into a family I had the honor of personally representing for many years. And it showed us that wildfire is no longer something that happens somewhere else. It happens here, and it happens to all of us. And the only way we're going to meet this crisis is by working together across regions, across communities, across divides, because the cost of inaction isn't just measured in acres, it's measured in lives. So I want to thank John Callahan for that night's introduction, and to the entire Chumstick Wildfire Stewardship Coalition, which is a mouthful, for the opportunity to join you tonight. If you look back at the history, since about 1984, wildfires have risen by more than 40% across the West, and the number of large wildfires on our landscapes has more than doubled in that time. And fires caused by dry, hot temperatures, by fireworks, by slash piles, by campfires left unattended, by utility lines. And we only need to look at what happened down in Southern California this January to recognize that this problem is getting worse every year. And to recognize our responsibility, all of our responsibility as leaders, as stewards, as human beings, to do everything in our power to prevent these fires from happening and responding to them quickly and effectively when they do occur. And as the new Commissioner of Public Lands for Washington State, I take very seriously my responsibility to the health and safety of our lands, forests, and communities. And central to that goal is bolstering and expanding our state's capacity for wildfire prevention, resilience, and response across the 13 million acres of state, federal, tribal, and privately owned lands. Which is why the work of your organization, of this organization, and our work together is so essential. You know, when DNR first launched Wildfire Ready Neighbors, which is our community readiness and resilience program in the spring of 2021, that very first launch event was right here in Chelan County. And that summer before that launch, if some of you remember, DNR responded to over 1,600 fires that burned over 800,000 acres across the state, and nearly half of those acres were here in central Washington. And unfortunately, the state response to those wildfires has not always matched the urgency of the crisis. Almost exactly 4 years ago, in response to the launch of this program, Wildfire Ready Neighbors, Bill Forehand wrote in the Leavenworth Echo, a paper that you probably are familiar with, and I quote, "Wildfire has finally caught the attention of state government." And that's true, and what started as a 6-week pilot program in 3 at-risk counties has since become a statewide initiative, helping communities across the state harden their homes, create defensible space around their properties, and equipping them with the resources and information they need to protect themselves against the worst outcomes of wildfire. And over the past 4 years, Wildfire Ready Neighbors has expanded to 21 counties, from Grays Harbor to Spokane. More than 6,800 people have signed up, and over 3,800 of whom have requested in-person home visits and forest health consultations, and nearly 35,000 individual actions have been undertaken. And we all should be proud of what this program has grown into. I especially want to take a moment and acknowledge the groundwork laid by this community right here, and many of the people in this room that helped make Wildfire Ready Neighbors what it is, because this community, your conservation district, your fire district, community leaders had already taken the lead in doing this kind of work before the DNR came in at this level to support it. And so this community, better than any other community in the state, and I mean that, any other community, understands the need for action. And the leadership embodied by this community is how you recently won a $9 million grant to continue to keep your lands, forests, and communities safe. And earlier today, I had the really great opportunity to see some of that work in action on a field tour led by the Cascadia Conservation District. We visited forest health sites, wildfire preparedness projects, including use of beneficial fire, a site to see the progress that had been made. And I have to say it was impressive to see firsthand the work that's being done to improve resiliency and forest health efforts around here. Wildfire Ready Neighbors and the forest health and wildfire preparedness work at the State Department of Natural Resources owes a heck of a lot to the vision and leadership right here in Leavenworth and across Chelan County. You know, Lake Wenatchee Fire and Rescue, Chelan County Fire District 3, Cascadia Conservation District, the county itself, and Chumstick Wildfire Stewardship have been driving community action in this area for years. And I'm really here tonight to do one thing, and that's to say thank you. And I want to thank and acknowledge Jake Hart, one of DNR's Wildland Fire Program Coordinators, for his exceptional work in this community, as well as Katie Zander, Larry Leach, and the other DNR staff across our region. I tell my family sometimes I can't screw this up too bad because there's 2,000 DNR employees to catch me. It's our professional program staff in this agency that do the work day in and day out. Moving forward, we have to continue to find ways to work together, to recommit ourselves to protecting the lands and communities under our care, because I think As I go into my first wildfire season as a new lands commissioner, I think it promises to be an unusually complicated one. And I think that's because now more than ever, it really is up to us. Thanks to cuts, freezes, and confusion at the federal level, our federal partners at the Forest Service are facing a very uncertain summer. Over 3,400 U.S. Forest Service workers have lost their jobs in the last few months, leaving federal lands and forests without the staff needed to fully respond to wildfires and to help prevent them in the first place. A delay in hiring federal seasonal firefighters has also left our federal partners behind in training and preparation for the upcoming season. Right here at home, a state budget crunch in Olympia has led to serious cuts in funding that will impact our work as an agency when it comes to forest health work, seasonal staffing, our partnerships with others, and more. These challenges are real, and we have to acknowledge their impacts. Having said that, I want to be clear, we will be ready for wildfire season this summer. Our wildfire division is hard at work training staff and preparing for the season. We were able to navigate the budget situation in Olympia the best we could, and we feel confident that we have the assets we need to keep us safe. And just a few weeks ago, our agency was able to send 15 surplus wildfire engines to fire districts in wildfire-prone areas around the state, including Skagit, Okanagan, and Grant counties. And despite the funding cuts included in the budget passed in Olympia this last weekend, we're continuing our forest health treatments across central and eastern Washington and conducting beneficial fire burns whenever possible. And of course, we'll continue to strengthen partnerships with communities on the ground doing the work, including and especially organizations like the Chumstick Wildfire Stewardship Coalition. Tomorrow marks the beginning of Wildfire Awareness Month. I don't think until I was commissioner I knew we had such a thing. And this Saturday we mark Wildfire Preparedness Day, in our state. And I don't think it's ever been more urgent to stress the importance of wildfire prevention, preparedness, and response than right now. This summer will be a pivotal moment for our state. After a number of strong years of progress, pressures both within and without our state are threatening to undo what's been accomplished and threatening our forests, lands, and communities in the process. If we're going to weather the cuts, the chaos, if we're going to build and bolster our response to the crisis, then we have to work together more collaboratively and with more intentionality than ever. If the federal government is chosen through damaging cuts and hastily written executive orders to step back from their historic role to address wildfires, then it's up to the state, local, and tribal levels to step up. And you all, the people of this community, have already made that choice by being here tonight. You've already stepped up. And I want to thank you all for your work and for your dedication. And I want to thank the coalition for working to safeguard these lands. And I want to thank the incredible employees at the Department of Natural Resources, our firefighters, our forest health coordinators, our support staff, and so many others. 3.5 years after that Cold Springs fire took their son, Jacob and Jamie Highland welcomed a baby daughter, Shiloh, into the world. Out of heartbreak, hope. Out of ash, renewal. And that's the spirit we need now. Because even as federal and state budgets tighten, our mission doesn't shrink. Our communities still need protection. Our forests still need care. And our best path forward is together. State, federal, nonprofit, tribal, community partners, shoulder to shoulder doing the work. We owe it to every family like the Highlands and to the future of every child growing up in Washington to build a safer, more resilient, and more hopeful future. And together, I believe we can. Thank you.
We'll have some questions during the panel discussion after our next presentation, but he said a couple of things. Commissioner Updegrove said a couple of things. Thank you, DNR, Forest Service, Fire District 3, Lake Chelan or Lake Wenatchee Fire and Rescue for all the work and dedication these folks do. And the training that goes on, I see personally, and it's pretty amazing. It's more than just squirting water on a fire. The training, the knowledge that all these people do. And to back up what Commissioner Updegrove just said, the mission statement of the coalition is develop a community culture and landscape adapted to wildfire, because it's going to be here. So anyway, I'd like to introduce now Paul Hesberg. Paul.
Any questions? It was pretty tight, wasn't it? All righty. So thanks for having me here, and thanks for such a great turnout. It's good to be here, and I'm going to give you sort of the punchline at the very beginning, and so it makes a little bit of sense. I study big landscapes and what makes them tick. I've been looking at landscapes from the 1600s and the 1800s and so forth, and now current landscapes, and I'm even studying them under climate change right now. And my story is going to be about how different forest conditions and different forest types, how they worked in a long-term relationship with fire, in a long-term relationship with indigenous burning, which I'll unpack as well. And the real key thing is, and this is the punchline, there is no living without active fire going forward. And I'm going to show you in an optimistic way how we can actually do it. We have the tools, we now have the know-how to be able to do it. And so it's about getting around to it at the scale of the problem. All right? So how we lost landscape resilience, how we can get it back, that's what I'm going to unpack. I'm going to start by showing a view of the Western United States where there appear to be no problems whatsoever, right? Any questions? So you see an awful lot of areas that are in what are grasslands, shrublands, things like that. The green areas, they're forests. And in the interior, forests live where the snow lives, okay? So where you have mountain snowpack, that's where forests live. When you're in the coast, in the west slope of the Cascades, you have a different story. You have a lot of precipitation coming off that ocean marine environment. And what's happening right now is the climate is really influencing the interior forest conditions and the west side forest conditions, because precipitation is not coming at the time that we need it, and the time-release water that grows trees in the Cascade Mountain Range and in the interior is fading. So we're seeing bark beetle outbreaks, fires, things like that. And I'm going to show you some of that. But one of the optimistic things I want to show you is that for millennia, it was fire that crafted a safe landscape. And that's the departure that we've gone through. It was actually living with fire and actively burning that actually made the North American continent safe to live in. Okay? So before we started putting fires out, what did it look like? For 10 to 12,000 years, that's a good Washington story, a good Oregon story, except coastal Oregon. Lightning and culturally ignited fires by our indigenous people, they created incredibly large areas of open canopy forest and non-forest. And I'll explain what these are, but these are places like meadows, wet and dry meadows, shrublands, open woodlands, prairies, things like that were very big elements across the landscape, and they've been, many of them, encroached by forest right now. And they used to be breaks on how fire spread across the landscape. In the coast now, we're finding indigenous occupation by Paleo-Indians 13 to 17,000 years ago. So we're moving up to something like 1,000 generations of people living with fire and burning the landscape. That's a big deal. When westward Euromigration, basically our ancestors came along, what was facilitated by cultural burning now is changing as a result. But our forebears actually got west because of indigenous burning. They cleared out so much area, so many mountain passes with fire that it facilitated the settlement of the West. We now know that. For the indigenous people, closed canopy forests were the enemy of food and resource production. What that basically means is that they don't even have a word for forests, most tribal people. It's the place where we go find shade, that kind of thing. The grocery store is in the understory. When they liberate water by opening up the forest, that makes water available for the roots and tubers and materials that they needed in the forest. So that's why they opened up the landscape. It was the grocery store. It was the material resources that they needed, okay? Absent these fires of choice, many forests are now denser. They're encroached, and most of these non-forest areas have been lost as a result of taking fire out of the woods and allowing forests to basically grow into the meadows, grow into the prairies, those kinds of things. All right? What we're finding out from our modeling is that often 30 to 50% of a forested landscape was not in forest at any one time, and I'll show you why that was a true statement. Essentially, those were the governors on fire spreading across the landscape, and these non-forest areas were prime. So this is what I mean by non-forest areas. They're burnt, bare ground, places that can't grow trees, that sort of thing. And they maintained these areas in an open condition, not only for their resources, but also for ungulate forage conditions, and because the ungulates were a meat source, right? Before trapping, there were tens of millions of beavers in Western North America, and they're incredible engineers. And what they did is they created vast interconnected wetlands, and these wetlands were a brake on fire spread as well. So now that these rivers are downcut, the riparian areas are dewatered right now, beavers, these master engineers, no longer serve this incredibly vital function of breaking up how fire can flow on the landscape. So the idea that humans lived on the landscape without fire is contrary to history, and it's contrary to fact. We're literally the first generations who've lived without fire in thousands of years. Today, there's a large fire deficit, and what that means is in order to reset at a continental and a regional landscape, we have to put much more fire on the ground, and we've got some other tools we can use as well. But just to give you a reference, under indigenous pre-industrial times, somewhere between 45 and 85 million acres a year burned in the continental United States. And that created fuel limitation at a continental scale. This is new research coming out of anthropology studies, and it's pretty cool. So here's the sharp drop-off in fire in a graphic, okay? You can see this is the whole United States wildfire burned area in millions of acres between 1926 and 2020. When it's basically showing you when we weren't good at putting out wildland fires, so much of the landscape burned early in the century. This is a total figure for the lower 48. By the time the 10 a.m. rule and the 10 acres are out, fires are out by 10 a.m. the morning of the next day, you can see we're starting to get good at putting fires out, and you can see a small fraction of the burned area is occurring right now. The far left part of the graph is telling you the kind of need for acres treated that occurs. Here's just the 11 western states, and you can see that effect as well here. That middle green period that I'm showing you was a period of cool, wet climate, and that's when we started to learn how to put fires. And for about 50 years, we thought we really had it. We really had the juice. We knew exactly what to do. But the climate gave us a hand down for about 50 years. Our climate comes off of the oceans, right? 70% of the earth is covered by water. Here, our climate comes off the Pacific Ocean. So this Pacific decadal oscillation is basically a metric that allows us to understand when we've got warm periods of climate and cool periods. And you can see that middle period where I showed you we knocked fires down, we got a hand down, and the climate made it easy for us to do it. When it starts warming and drying, what we see is it's a much tougher problem than we thought. Okay, so what changed? There's a handful of things, but they don't start with fire suppression. They actually start with the loss of indigenous burning, dispossession of our indigenous people from the land. Introduced diseases killed 80 to 90% of all of our original people by 1850 in the United States. So 90% of the burners weren't on the landscape anymore because of European diseases, all right? We came along, we migrated west, we drained the wetlands, genocide of the remaining people, livestock grazing, we grazed the prairies, and those prairies and meadows and such had bred many of the original fires on that landscape. They're fast fire sending, they're early to go and late ready to go, they can burn. And so they were sending fire all the time. That's how you get 40 to 80 million acres burned at a continental scale, because you have a lot of grass. In fact, forests are number 3 in the historical landscape. So much indigenous burning created grasslands as the primary land cover across the lower 48. After that, it was wetlands, not forests. Third were forest cover. And now those places have really changed as a result of a lot of influences. So fire suppression is actually the last thing to happen to keep fire out of the woods. In the early logging days when we were building the West, we'd harvested the large old trees. As we harvested them, smaller shade-loving trees that were fire intolerant filled in the spaces left by the big old guys. We didn't burn the slash because we didn't know fire suppression was going great, so we left decades of slash on the ground. We killed off the hardwoods because the money trees are conifers for fiber, that sort of thing. Hardwoods, I'll show you why they're critical to the landscape. Tree-killing bark beetles started developing large outbreaks, and they're basically diagnosing the forest is too dense, I don't have enough water, I'm not getting enough sunlight, and so in the interval that we're putting out fires, bark beetles are ramping up, thinning out the forest. That stuff falls down, it becomes fuel over time, so you can see a process is concentrating the problem, okay? Climate change is a big deal right now. We're warmer, we're drier, we're windier, we have more large fire days where it's hot, dry, and windy. And so as Commissioner Updegrove said to us, we're essentially moving into the most severe events driving the bus for us. Fire seasons are getting longer. In California, it's nearly year-round. We have December fires in Colorado. There's less snowpack, the winters are getting warmer, and this is such a big deal. Human fire starts in the US are 80 to 90% of all fires, and if we didn't start those fires, if we were more careful, it would really be a game changer. Finally, the last thing is we don't want smoke. We're so tired of wildfire smoke. Smoke management basically says we don't want to have smoke above this really tight threshold, but it's an unsustainable air quality. And the more we tighten down, the more large wildfires we're going to have because we're not doing the prescribed burning that's necessary. The feedback will be more, larger, and more severe fires, more smoke with more severe public health consequences. All right, what I want to do, because visuals are really powerful, is show you some examples of the changes. All the black and white photos come from the National Archives in Seattle, and my friend John Marshall scanned all these at super high resolution, made them available to me for this and all sorts of other talks. This is looking at the backside of Mission Ridge ski area. That's what it looked like in the 1930s, okay? And so all of the stuff that looks bare and exposed and low tree density, that was because of burning fires that were going on in the 1930s, not that long ago, less than a century ago. The landscape looks like this now, or it did before the fire. And you can see how we have sort of this shifting baseline. Generation after generation thinks what we're seeing is normal. And so what we have now isn't normal. These are dry forests. They used to burn every 2 to 15 years. Fire frequency begot low severity or some moderate severity. So you got fire in 2 flavors, low and moderate, where less than 20% of the trees got killed or between 20% and half of them got killed. All right, and here's that feedback that you get out of frequent fire. This frequent low-severity fire is skiffing off dead wood, it's thinning out fuel ladders, the seedlings, saplings, small poles, and what that's doing is it's taking away for fire on the ground to get into the canopies of trees, okay? So it's a stabilizing influence. Those fires happen fast, they last a day or two, and the smoke is about 1/10 of what comes out of a wildfire. You keep fire out of the woods, you don't have that high frequency, that tending kind of stabilizing fire. Sub-canopy live trees, they grow up, dead wood falls down and accumulates, and now creates an opportunity for flames to climb out of the dead wood into the multi-layered canopies that take you into the overstory canopy. The result is the crown fires we're seeing today. This is a little bit higher up on the hill. Think about middle elevations. Oh, I was going to go back to this one before and say these are ponderosa pine forests. They're pine with Douglas fir forests. So if you need a mental image, that's the kind of woods we're talking about there. I'm getting dizzy too. All right. So these are images. Again, all these color photos are John Marshall photos. He went back and took these same photo points for us. And these are places where you would have moderate frequency fires every 20 to 50 years, and then some high frequency fires that would occur where you'd have, high severity fires that would happen. These are Douglas fir forest, western larch forest, mixed with lodgepole pine, grand fir, that kind of thing. Fires of all three flavors, low, moderate, and high, occurred in them. And the thing I really want you to focus on in that top black and white is just how much of a patchwork of open versus closed, different size classes, different densities and stuff the landscape was made of. All of these conditions are governors on fire spread, fire severity, flame lengths, everything, okay? And you can see how it's a carpet of trees in the bottom photo. Here, John gave me some high def photos so I can beam in a little better and you can just see the magnitude of the changes. Again, less than 100 years of change, and we'd never suspect the landscape changed this much. These are cold forests, so be thinking about lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir. These elevations are going to be in the 5,500 to 7,500 feet in elevation. Cold forests experience moderate to infrequent fire. Where there were a lot of meadows, it was about every 10 to 30 years. Where there weren't, about every 150 years. So lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir. The two flavors of fire you can see on the left there. Beaming in, I just want to show you the incredible difference. There's a lot of people that think the high elevation cold forests haven't changed much. We're learning that they changed the most because about half of those environments wasn't in forest at any one time, and nobody's around that remembers that. Okay? Here's a look at the highest elevation forests in the interior. These are below the upper tree line, and you can see forests in the top black and white. They're kind of ribbon forests, and there's a lot of meadow. I'm going to beam in and show you just how much those forests have changed. They were primarily dominated by wet and dry meadows at the time, and you can see ribbons of forest would occur, but most of that landscape is actually meadow. And when it was meadow, it would cure in the summer and would spread fast fire, and so you actually had low and moderate severity burns in the super high country as well. There's 10 to 100 times more trees in the bottom photo than was there 80 years ago, 90 years ago, okay? So there's an epidemic of trees in these forest types. Sounds crazy if you're talking about forests, right? Because we should just have so much, but they don't look or work like they did when fire was an active part of the system. There's going to be a test on this here, so actually, really kidding. So on the left, you can see a map of a bunch of provinces, like they're named the Northern Glaciated Mountains. So think about that as the Okanagan Highlands, Northern Cascade Mountains. So that's our East Cascades here in Northern Cascades in Washington, and so on. You can see the Blue Mountains, you know, here and so forth. Well, what we did is we reconstructed how much non-forest was there. Is it a big deal? And did it change the fire ecology by losing it? And all I really want you to do is to look at this column here. The Northern Glaciated Mountains, 43% of the landscape that could support forest wasn't growing forest at any one time. And the Cascade Mountains that we think are deep forest, 41% of it wasn't in forest at any one time. In the Blue Mountains, it's about 50-50, 48.5%. Isn't in forest at any one. It's grass balds with forests of various density. In the Upper Klamath Mountains, which is down here, 70% of the landscape was in grasslands and meadows, not in forest at any one time. So you can see it geographically varies, but non-forest elements, which are these prairies, shrublands, open woodlands, they're key to the resilience of forest landscape because they're the governors on fire rate of spread, the intensity of fire, and how big the flames get. Okay? So some take-homes, non-forest elements, despite that smacking with all of our German forestry training, they're critical to resilient landscapes, okay? There's a lot of it historically. Most of it occurred on sites that could grow forest. And from the data I just showed you, 70 to 25% of the area wasn't in forest at any one time, even though it could, and the average is about 40% of the landscape area. From a wildlife perspective, this is a gorgeous recipe because many critters will nest or den and feed in different areas. And so they've got a landscape where this stuff is close by. When it's all connected, dense forest, they have a really different recipe. So these are the non-forests. This includes rock, water, snow, ice, burn bare ground, and then the other conditions that I spoke to earlier. These features all limited future fire severity and future fire size, and those governors are what are off the landscape. Surface fuels were very often grasses and shrubs, so a million-acre fire wasn't a disaster 150 years ago. A million-acre fire produced mostly surviving forests because there was a frequent enough fire, it was skiffing off the dead wood, it wasn't lasting very long, and a tremendous area of the forest survived the fire. These fuels typically cured fast, they were available to burn often, they spread fast fire, but the flames were short, they were low intensity, and when they bumped into forest, they very often didn't burn the adjacent forest, or they thinned it. So here's the cartoon. There's a tug-of-war going on in nature between factors that are able to grow forests. So how much water you get, how much sunlight you get, what are the temperature regimes, that sort of thing. And those same factors drive the wildfire regime during the fire season. They're what create the curing of the fuels so they're available to burn, the winds that happen and so forth. So this tug-of-war is going on, and the emergent property of the tug-of-war is places that converted to non-forest so that the rest of the forest can be forest. And we have a lot of tools to do that, but basically rebalancing the act is what we have to do at scale in order to be able to have resilient forests going forward. It's a very large-scale concern. These non-forest elements and hardwood patches and wetlands are emergent properties of that fire regime, and they're ultra critical to get back on the landscape. With climate change, this intensifies, and our models are showing us that we can A, aid the transitions much better than wildfires can, and B, we have the tools to do it. We just have to get to the right scale to shift, to tip the landscapes to more benign conditions. Here's a model. Is this showing up pretty good? Yeah. So this is of actual fires burning over a 1,000-year period of time. So we resurrected the historical fire ecology of this 600,000-acre landscape in the Okanagan Highlands. Okay, and what's happening is the fires aren't getting put out. So on the right, you're seeing how the fires are creating open versus closed canopy conditions. These are all the same years. And on the left, you can see how forest structure ages. The darker the color, the older the forest structure. The western 2/3 is cold forests in this particular landscape. The eastern third is basically dry pine, dry mixed conifer, and moist mixed conifer forests. And so what you're seeing is a ton of fire, but it's not clearing the landscape, it's tending the landscape. It's reducing fuels, and it's giving you those governors on the landscape. So ongoing fires, they overlapped irregularly over space and time. They created these mosaics of non-forest and forest. And this reburning, overlapping fires, decoupled the dead wood from the forest that was trying to grow forward. And you can grow more forest if you have overlapping burns over time. So the return of fire in these landscapes is not only inevitable, we now know how they tick. We know the elements that need to be there. We even know how to put them in the right places on the landscape. The key is we have to do it at a sufficient scale so they're not random acts of resilience on the landscape, but they actually change the way the larger landscape works. Here's a set of maps that show you how the change in forest structure and composition provides throttle control for fire rates of spread. So here you can see that these patterns of forest structural conditions, the light red, the pink, is basically new forest conditions. The shades of blue are old forest conditions. The yellow shades are open canopy conditions. The green shades are multi-layered canopy conditions. And so they receive fire in a different way. In the second panel from the left there, you can see the fires that burned in the year I'm showing. And you can see that even though the fires are burning there, they're not destroying the forest conditions. In the third panel, you're seeing the severity of the fires that burned at each one. And you can notice that most of the severity in the landscape is low, yellow, or moderate, orange, not high severity fire. So the secret sauce is to have enough fire in the landscape where you're constantly reducing fuels or reducing them by other means so that you can actually store more forest on the landscape. And on the right, you can see it's just basically showing you when you look at all the fires in sum, most of the forest survived, it wasn't killed. All right. There's a role for broadleaf forest species. I mentioned that early, and these broadleafs are basically hardwood trees, so things like alder, cottonwood, willow, oak, maple, aspen, all of these things were critical. They're early cereal species. They jump out of the hole, and they're prolific seeders right after a fire disturbance. And when there was no putting fires out, and there was no active management on the landscape, these were governors on fire spread. They're like a wet blanket to fire spread. They're mesic, they're moist conditions, and so within the first 2-3 rows of trees, about 80% of the time we see the fires go into those things and they go out when they get into a hardwood patch. So these things are critical, and we need to consider rebuilding a larger role for hardwood forests. And I think in the manufacturing and the marketing sectors, we have the opportunity to do that. Once upon a time, we grew a lot of hardwood, and it was commercial and it was incredibly valuable. So we have the opportunity to expand that and make that work. This is a look in our modeling at how broadleaf forest patches provide resilience. On the left side, you can see the percentage of the time, 0 is black, 100% of the time is in that darkest shade of red, how much of the time hardwoods are occurring on the landscape. So you can see in all the darker hues, aspens hanging out there a very, very long time because there's a lot of fire on this landscape. In the right view, you can see fire perimeter density. That's basically counting the number of times that cell on the landscape stopped a fire because it was in hardwood. And so where you have orange, red patterns, and lighter orange patterns, it's basically showing over time, and in this simulations, it's 3,000 years running this fire regime. It's showing you that hardwood forests are a powerful tool when they're allowed to grow on the landscape because they're, again, a governor on fire resilience. All right, the scale of the problem is massive. And I want to show you a cartoon on the left and then another one on the right. Compare the top row of maps on the left. The maps on top are 1800s vintage, and the bottom they're 2020s. And all I really want you to see is that across the top, the patterns of forest structure drive patterns of fuel loading, fire behavior, flame length, intensity, crown fire potential, okay? When you lose these elements, you create very well-connected conditions for crown fires. So in this example landscape, what I've been talking to you about has literally guaranteed that high crown fire potential fires will burn on this landscape. This isn't a small local landscape problem. On the right, I'm showing you 1800 and late 20th century view, 150 million acres of the interior Columbia Basin. And so you can see Eastern Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Northwest Montana. And you can see how a landscape, because of the frequent fire dominated by low and moderate severity fire, yellow and orange, is now dominated by moderate and high severity fire. So regional landscape fires that go 500,000 million acres are not only happening, but they're a big thing to come going forward. We have to break this landscape up. All right. This kind of pattern change is also really critical to the native bark beetles. Lower left, you can see the range of this mountain pine beetle. It's a big ticket item here in the western US. So it's a native, it belongs here, and it's an important process. That really big picture of that is not its actual size. And it usually is carrying luggage. So the map you can see where I'm showing yellow, orange, red, that's the change in the patterns of vulnerability from the historical 1800 condition to the current condition. And here's why that matters. Beetles have to fly about 1 kilometer to complete their maturation. When they're all matured up, what they do is they attack low vigor trees. In the historical landscape, the spaces between vulnerable patches were bigger than they could fly to. So when they dispersed to attack another tree, they got lost on the way. And so about 90 to 95% of the dispersal was lost. Now that we have this contagiously vulnerable landscape, well connected for beetle flight, beetles move from one patch to the next patch to the next patch. And so we have massive outbreaks like you can see in that middle top photo. All right, this is all ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine being killed by a single beetle. And this was an attack that occurred in a single year. All right? And you know the beetle is happening because you can see these pitch tubes coming out of the trees. And that's what that bad boy looks like under the bark. All right, I want to talk about the role of climate change. An awful lot of the data right now is saying under the current condition, extreme climate and weather, drives large area burn, and it's absolutely the case. Every study throughout North America and the world is showing it. But indigenous burning, large scale and frequent burning, changed this connection so that the climate wasn't driving really big fires. And we know that from studies throughout the West right now. Because we have more fuel and dense and well-connected forest conditions, that drives the burn severity. So think of severity driven by fuel, burned area driven by the climate, okay? Some people say it's one or the other, it's both. And that's reducing the fuel is the weak link. Now, how many of you have seen a drawing that's animated like this? Isn't that the coolest thing you've ever seen? I know. So, on the top, what you can see is a landscape under indigenous cultural burning. It's really open. There's a lot of hardwoods on that landscape, and they're burning somewhere all the time each year. In the middle, you can see once we started suppressing fires, you can see the little planes there and guys jumping out of airplanes. I know. I wanted them moving, but they're not moving. This is us effectively dousing fires, but you can also see the hardwood elements are starting to decrease. The forest is getting denser. And on the bottom, what you can see is we're having these big fires because the features that I was talking about before, they faded out over a period of time, so they're no longer blocking the flow of fire. If you're interested, the readings on the left side are really showing us the story of how indigenous burning, its frequency and extent, was a game changer. All right, under climate change, this is what we're seeing. So on the left graph, this is the global average temperature, and it's compared to temperatures in the mid-century. Remember when I showed you we had that cooler, more quiescent period of climate, all right? So here you can see changes relative to mid-century going up. The bugaboo is the graph on the right side there, where these greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, are literally driving the bus. And so you can see all of them sharply increasing over the same period of time, and the increases are continuing in this vein. What does it mean? It means all of our seasons in the lower US, in the lower 48, are changing. So here we're projecting changes by mid-20th century, so think 2050, okay? 1981 to 2010 is shown in the top row. 2060 to 2069 is shown in the bottom row. So think January is representing winter, April representing spring, July, the heat of the summer, October, our fall conditions. Under all conditions, the average daytime high temperature is going up. That's going to create a longer fire season. Fuels are going to be cured over more extensive areas, and we're going to see forest types that haven't burned in a long time just burn. Okay? So it's a huge influence on where forests get to grow and how dry they're going to be. And here's kind of the clincher. By the mid-century, it's going to be moving towards pushing out winter, spring, and fall. By 2100, the summer throughout the northern hemisphere is going to be half the year long, and it's squeezing out the period of snow accumulation, and it's shrinking fall and spring burning. So it's basically telling you is we don't burn that much in the spring and fall. It's going to be so much less unless we bust a move fairly quickly on the landscape. All right, so some take-homes here. This is toward climate and wildfire resilience. We have to stabilize the current forest biomass. We think in most of the landscapes we're studying, current forest biomass is 40 to 50% more than it was 200 years ago. And we need to reestablish burned and recovering mosaics like the kind that I've been showing you. Stabilize that tug of war that I spoke about. And then the positive ecological role of fire. Almost everything that grows in the woods you're familiar with has a long-term relationship with fire. They're fire-adapted forests, species, understory plants, herbs. They're all adapted to a long-term relationship with fire. It's an incredibly important thing to bring that ecological role back, not only for our indigenous people, but actually for the habitats and the species that we hold dear. With climate change, non-forests and open canopy forests are going to become increasingly important. Our models are showing us that non-forest and open conditions increase significantly, some places 20 to 30% over current conditions. So if we don't want landscape conditions that are driven by the fires that have already occurred, we really need to do large moves at scale. And by that I mean large fires. Our most extreme 2 or 3% of fires are the ones that are burning the landscape right now. That's a footprint that comes back into grasses and shrubs that are cured and available to burn every single year. So when fire touches the edge of a 100,000 acre, 10,000 acre patch of severely burned forest, it burns again and again and again. And the opportunity to become forest again dwindles until it can't come back to forest again. So that's the idea. If fires that are the worst 2% of fires that are running the landscape, they continue, we're going to lose a ton of forest, we won't get it back, and we're going to have more large fires because of the work wildfires have already done. Okay? And they're running the table right now. Here's some tools. Our colleagues at Washington DNR in the Forest Health Office have helped us to build this. This is a model that calculates climatic water deficit. It basically says where is the amount of water that is going to come through various forms of precipitation going to be less than the vegetation needs to make a living, to survive. And what you can see is gray is moving up the hill. Dry aspects are becoming more extensive across the landscape. That's where the non-forest is going to happen, and that's where the open canopy forests are going to happen naturally, but not in their current conditions. Big fires will create a different transition than we can do with core management tools we have today. All right, and here's a look at how management affected a Labor Day fire. I don't remember if you remember this Oregon fire, 2021, the bootleg fire. 400,000 acres and some change. And what I want to show you in the left-hand photo is how fire running through the canopies of trees stopped. Could you get that? The fire stopped when it got to the thinned and burned part of the forest. It literally, most of the trees survived. Another look at it, you can see the same kind of angle in a different part of the fire. You can see in the background, severely burned area in the black. This is an area where the fire moved through and it was only thinned, but the fuels weren't burned. And the mortality losses are high, even though it was thinned. On the left side, it was thinned and burned, and very few trees at all burned because it was treated, all the work was done. All right, some take-homes. Take-homes, I'll talk about them at 3 different levels. One take-home is, what do you do if you own a home? There's a lot of resources, and we've got a lot of people in this room who work in the FireWise and CWPP space, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But I do want to give a nod to the fact that if you're a homeowner and you live in a neighborhood and you live in a community, there are things that you can do to make sure your house doesn't burn. Read about it in firewise.org, and then read it in usfa.fema.gov for how you do CWPP planning. The WUI code is incredibly important. It's not a cafeteria. You don't get to shop it if you want to be protected. The WUI code is a hang together thing. If you do the stuff in the WUI code, if you do the stuff in the FireWise treatments, it protects your home, it protects your community. So for those of you who have governance responsibilities, think about the WUI code as being a full meal deal in terms of egress roads in and out and what you do to protect a community and then what maintenance looks like. Takeaways for regional landscape. Forest managers can really recreate the diverse patterns of forest age, density, and species, open and closed canopies. They can rebuild these patchworks of forest, non-forest, hardwood. They're essential to restoring resilience. Without them, landscapes won't be resilient. That's kind of a bottom line. All right, takeaways for forest environments. There's a number of different field treatments that folks in this room are actively doing in and around the community that are critical. All I want to do is shed a little bit of light about what works best and what works more poorly, okay? There's several different kinds of treatments. First one is you just thin. The next one is you thin and pile concentrations of fuel, and then you broadcast burn. That's the best one. And then there's prescribed burning only. And I'll compare these as I go along. And then there's thinning and piling, and there's also mastication, but that's a kind of a double-edged sword. All right, thinning alone, what happens? We recover wood fiber if it's commercial. Sometimes it's pre-commercial. We leave abundant slash because we're just thinning, and especially if it's not commercial, because an awful lot of the trees that grew up under fire exclusion leave a ton of wood behind and slash. It's the lowest cost when trees have value, so that's a plus. But the future fire effects are less control. It's basically a fuel relocation treatment. You take it out of the standing up stuff and you put it on the ground and it cures, and now it's going to be burning in a couple of years. All right. The future overstory is less well protected to not well protected, okay, because you just move the fuel around. Thinning and piling and prescribed burning is a really powerful tool. And Forest Service and the DNR in Washington State are heavily invested in doing this. It recovers necessary wood fiber to be able to do the work that's needed. Abundant slash is burned. There's less to hand pile, usually just the concentrations if there are areas where you really knock down a lot of trees. Broadcast burning is good for the native plant community. It's not only good to knock the fuels down on every acre, but it also restores that ecological role of fire in the landscape. It's the most effective hazardous fuel reduction treatment. It prepares mineral soil if you want to grow ponderosa pine and larch, or if you want them to regenerate naturally because you've got a lot of leaf trees that are in great shape to reseed you. It's spatially precise. Fire effects are the most controlled after the treatments, and there's less frequent maintenance burns after the fact. Prescribed burning alone, it works, but here's the deal. In many cases, there's no wood fiber recovery where it's just not a commercial opportunity. There's no slash left behind, which is a plus. There's less or nothing to really hand pile. It prepares mineral soil for pine and larch if the trees survive. Fire effects are harder to control. It's imprecise. The fire perimeter is harder to control, so escapes happen when you don't have the fuel conditions knocked down. It requires more staffing often, and it requires longer staffing often, and those are costs. It may get more or less mortality than you desire, so that's the imprecision thing. You'll go into areas like you can see in the bottom right photo there where it's flaming up. Is it going to take off and run in the crowns there? It's uncertain, and that's why it's less precise. Maintenance burns are required more often because the first burn lays down a lot of dead wood. When it's on the ground, it's more dead wood than was there with the first burn, and you got to burn it again. You got to keep knocking it down. Thinning and piling, a lot of this happens. Here you can see this is a cold deck where old treetops were left, and then there's a bunch of slash on the ground. This was after a clear cut. And you can see that that slash, that big pile there is about 15 feet high. And if that's left there to just decay over time, that's going to send flames with high winds to forests that are not treated. It's with an ember attack. So that's unsafe as well. You recover the merchantable wood fiber. There's abundant slash, but you have to burn the piles, both in the top and the bottom. The top piles are dangerous for the forest because it literally will sterilize the site. The larger the pyres, the taller the pyres, the hotter and the longer they burn. And that smoldering combustion creates mortality in the soil as much as a foot or deeper. It's most expensive to thin and to hand pile, so bottom right. And this is not being burned. And now imagine if a fire is growing through the grasses and shrubs in the understory on a hot, dry, windy day. You think that tree cover is going to last? It won't. The acres treated are small, and it's incredibly labor intensive. In fact, it's usually the most labor intensive and costly. It's hard on the soil if large piles are burned, as I mentioned. It's least effective in protecting future stands because you're just leaving the fuel behind. It's just relocated to the ground. All right, that ends my comments. Hopefully we got a little bit of time for questions, John. Thank you very much for your attention. That worked?
Yeah, sure did.
Okay, now we're going to have a panel discussion with questions, and some of the questions you may ask of Paul and Commissioner Updegrove. And I'd like to introduce right now Pete Teagan, who is our moderator. Pete? And if the panelists could come up now.
And maybe we'll just take a couple minutes to have, if the audience has any questions for Paul or the Commissioner up the Grove while we get the panel set up, we can take those now. Are there any questions in the audience for Paul?
Yeah.
I saw the lights back. Go ahead, sir.
So the question is, how much did the warming increase in the fire size in the area burned? I gotcha. So everybody hear that? How much did the warming influence the tree growth? It's a really variable deal. It depends a lot on geography and the forest type and the elevation stuff. But the bottom line is there was a little bit of CO2 uptake that increased forest growth, but that's actually been a wash now. And we're seeing forest growth tank measurably in many forest types right now. And it's not only a growth of trees, but it's also what can be supported in terms of density. Just beetles thinning stands like crazy as a result of just too darn many trees. Okay? Anything for the commissioner? Or me? Yeah. I mentioned a bunch about harvesting. Forest thinning is what I was talking about. Basically getting rid of the trees that grew up during the period of fire exclusion. And then I contrasted the methods that employ thinning without the follow-up burning to be able to show that you can use just fire, but it's not as good. If you do the thinning and remove some of that commercial material to pay for the acres that you're treated, and then you follow up with burning, that's the top treatment. Okay? Sorry about that. I should have defined thinning. Sorry about that. Yeah. I'm finding out why as I age. Years. Lots of years. 90% of the old forests in Oregon and Washington have been liquidated. And these forests were 350 to 1,200 years old. And the trees were. And so an awful lot of it is to take conditions that have the best chance of being able to support those species and grow the medium and larger size that are fire tolerant, grow those trees forward. So the game needs to be in the understory for quite a long time, and there's a tremendous amount of work that can be done there and roll the bigger, thicker barked, fire tolerant trees forward over time. And it won't get fixed in 150 years. It'll get fixed in 2 or 3 centuries because there was so much primary forest that went down the road on logging trucks to build communities and to build the West after the Second World War. That was the focus. So, yeah. But there's incredible work to be done with the harvesting treatments in the understories. Yeah, Ann? That's a really great question. It's citizens and their intolerance of smoke for a variety of reasons that actually allow the smoke management tolerances to be very, very tight. And so for us, understanding, in the medical community, the heart and lung community is coming around now to understand that the low smoke alternative is the best alternative for human health. But there's still an awful lot of people who hold on to the dream that you can live without smoke, and that option is not on the table. So we need to start working with people to be able to get the smoke management plan, for example, for the state of Washington. We've grown in a lot of ways, but wildfires right now in the NACs get a pass from smoke right now. They're acts of God. But when we save 90% of that smoke through prescribed burning, we don't get a pass for that smoke. Okay, and that's the problem with how smoke's being managed right now, put very, very simply. So what we need to do is be a society that is open to the idea of more good smoke, that's less, that's healthier. There's actually a difference between bad smoke and good smoke. The sooty emissions that come out of smoldering combustion, fires that burn for weeks and months, that's what kills people. Prescribed fires don't have a lot of PM 2.5 emissions, and they last for a day, day and a half, the smoke emissions. So Good fire, huge smoke savings, not as damaging to people. We need to get the message out. We need administrative help to allow us to be able to open up that plan and start treating the acres and not be shut down if it's just not perfect. What that does is it feeds bigger, hotter fires in the future. Does that help? We literally need to be burning large areas after we're thinning them, that sort of thing. There are a lot of acres that we can just prescribe burn, but they're not most acres. Should we go, Pete?
Yeah. Yeah, one more question.
The two words that come to mind for me are continuity and momentum when it comes to our wildfire prevention and forest health work, particularly here on the east side. I will spend every penny the legislature will give us on forest health management and resilience work. And I want to see us hit some of the ambitious goals we've set as a department as it relates to beneficial fire. That being said, our ability to hit, as you said, the pace and the scale are going to be challenged by two things. Number one, a reduction in the federal workforce, and number two, significant budget reductions to the agency at the state level. The legislature a number of years ago made a commitment of $125 million a biennium every 2 years. That's how they do their budgets. And first biennium, that was great, they did it. The second biennium, it turned into $115 million. And when they adjourned this last weekend, they had cut that funding to $60 million. They gave us $40 million in this first year. And we're gonna see if we have some dollars left we can pull forward. So I think this year, there'll be a lot of continuity, but we need to work together to make sure the legislature understands this is a core government function. It's about public safety, it's about protecting lives and homes, and it's about having healthy forests and ecosystems. And those constraints tamper some of my ambitions in the sense of I would like to increase that scale and pace. But from a policy standpoint, I want to maintain the momentum and continuity with the good work that's been done in the past. And I was going to say, they always say you should have people smarter than you working for you. I'll be excusing myself, and I think Jake has probably forgotten more than I will ever know about this subject matter, so our department is going to be well represented and in good hands to answer questions, I'm sure. I'm happy. I don't know what the
Well,
schedule
let's
is.
give the Commissioner of Public Lands and Dr. Paul Hesberg a round of applause. Thank you. Great. Well, we've heard a lot about wildfire and some of the issues we have with forest health, but right now we're going to shift focus a little bit to what we as community members, homeowners, and residents can do to help mitigate the potential impacts of wildfire on our properties in our community. My name is Pete Tagan, and for a number of years I've worked in forest health with wildfire preparedness and resiliency, and I'm excited to be here with the Chumstick Coalition tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves, their role, and say a little bit about the organizations they represent, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions, or we can also about their specific programs as well. But we'll go ahead and start with Mike.
My name is Mike Smith. I'm the Deputy Chief of Operations for Fire District 3 in Leavenworth.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Katie Zander. I'm our Service Forestry Coordinator for Southeast Region DNR. We work with small private landowners to assist with financial assistance as well as technical.
Jake Hart, Washington DNR Community Resilience Program. I'm a Wildfire Division employee working in Eastern Washington, covering Chelan, Douglas, Grant, and Adams County, helping communities prepare for wildfire. I do things like working on county-level planning documents, managing grant programs, the Firewise USA program, and working directly with communities.
Thanks everyone for being here. Erica Tacker, I'm the district ranger for the U.S. Forest Service Wenatchee River Ranger District here in Leavenworth. So I supervise all our programs. We've got the fire folks at the back. Our fire leadership is at the back of the room, and all our other programs, recreation, natural resources, planning, all of those things that go on the district. So.
Good evening, everyone. Patrick Haggerty with Cascadia Conservation District. I'm the Forestry and Community Resilience Program Manager. And the Conservation District, we work with private landowners to provide technical and financial assistance to help folks steward their land. So we have a lot of wildfire preparedness programs to help people retrofit their homes, create defensible space, steward their forests, and some resources to help folks do that.
Great. Before we go to the audience for questions, I'm wondering if maybe we can have you all sort of explain a little bit about the tremendous amount of coordination and collaboration you've been engaging with over the last number of years and some of the achievements you've accomplished. It was, something that the Commissioner of Public Lands mentioned is really more now than ever is a time to lean in on that working together. So I'm wondering if somebody might speak a little bit to some of the coordination and collaboration efforts.
I'll start off by going over a couple of programs that we have that really the DNR and Jake Hart right here has been instrumental in helping us to grow our community chipping program. He helps fund that. We've increased that year to year, the amount of days that we offer, debris days where people can bring it to us because it's normally a mobile chipping program. And we know that that's been a concern here, apple maggot quarantine, you can't burn your piles after June normally. So we're just trying to make sure that we keep that program going to give people the opportunity to get rid of that debris. The other thing we do is offer home assessments to anybody that's interested that will let us come and do a home assessment. And that is also funded with help from Jake through the DNR. We use the Wildfire Ready Neighbors program that you heard Commissioner Up the Grove talk about. So that's just a couple of areas where I can't really stress enough Cascadia Conservation District and the DNR, how much they really step in to help our fire district specifically, but I know that they're doing work all over the state. And I'd also thank the Forest Service. John Tepley's the fire management officer for the Wenatchee River Ranger District. He and Matt Kennedy have been, they're always available to us. They help provide training if we need equipment and things like that. And that helps us. We know each other. So as far as interagency cooperation, when we have an incident, we're not strangers, we know each other. So that's just a few ways that some of the organizations have worked, at least with the fire district.
All right, we'll just head on down then. Oh, perfect. We might collaborate on this piece as well. So for our DNR Service Forestry program, like I mentioned, we do provide technical and financial assistance to small private landowners, but we're not the only agency here and the only partner that provides that assistance. So up on the panel today, we have Patrick Haggerty with Cascadia Conservation District. Those folks also provide that same assistance to landowners. So we actually work with the Conservation District. We've worked with other partners such as NRCS as well, and we've got plans to work with the county here in the future to utilizing some CWDG funds that they received. But really, it's going to be a partnership where we leverage those funds and we try to minimize that time that that landowner is deciding which program they're going to. So all of us are pretty well interconnected to get that landowner contact to the right person. And if there's the opportunity to leverage our funds together to increase our rates and give that landowner the best chance at getting that work done, that's something that we actively do in the community here. So let Patrick fill in any of the gaps.
Sure, yeah, I can think of a lot of ways that the community is cooperating together and coordinating. I think that large grant that Commissioner Up the Grove talked about in his introduction, the Community Wildfire Defense Grant, is a great example of coordination in this Leavenworth area. And so that was $9.8 million that came through Forest Service funding. And it's really allowing partners to coordinate on this issue at multiple scales. So the fire districts like Wenatchee and Fire District 3 are going to be kind of working directly with homeowners to provide defensible space around their homes. DNR, Chelan County, and ourselves are going to be working with private landowners to create strategic fuel breaks in really important areas throughout the Chumstick and Lake Wenatchee area. And then we'll be coordinating with the Forest Service to make sure that those treatment areas and projects are aligned. And so we've been working on that locally here, and there's also the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative that's done a great job over their years of making sure that all the different agencies in the area are working together with the Forest Service, because they do own nearly 80% of the land in Chelan County is federally owned, and so we got to work together. It's an all lands, all hands, all hands on deck sort of situation.
Everyone else is covering it. So yeah, I mean, in addition to the fire response, fire preparedness coordination, that's just a regular thing, really, an annual preparedness kind of training exercise, as well as just an active fire management. That seems to be kind of really instilled in the culture around here, that real good coordination and communication. The planning side, definitely the last couple of projects have really just been community driven and informed a lot by our partners through the Forest Health Collaborative and all the member organizations of that, where we can try to hone in on where the most bang for the buck is going to be in terms of timber management, fuels management, working through the Upper Wenatchee pilot project. We're really getting that going through all the efforts of partners. Chelan County Natural Resource Department is working on immediate WUI work right now, and we're working on timber sales up there. The Chumstick to Lower Pashastin project is still taking shape, but that is really, we're trying to coordinate as much as we can on how we're going to be implementing that project. So we're doing kind of the most around the community. So.
Yeah, most of it was covered. There's a few things that I could speak to that wasn't mentioned yet, but I'll reiterate the Community Wildfire Defense Grant through the U.S. Forest Service. When the Community Resilience Program for the DNR was created in 2022, that was kind of the main focus point for us, was to get that program up off the ground in Washington State. And we're up over $40 million of awards brought to Washington State, statewide through that program, and real close to $10 million right here in Chelan County through that program. And that's a lot of collaboration it took to get those applications together and submitted, and now the work to hit the ground, right? So that piece there, as I mentioned multiple times, super proud of that. The Wildfire Ready Neighbors program that the DNR implemented in 2021, that was another program that brings people together. When it was first implemented as a home assessment program, it was nothing new in this area. Home assessments have been happening in this area through all the partners forever. It's just provided a little more marketing power, horsepower, and a statewide brand to bring everybody together to do home assessments, as well as provide other resources and awareness. The FireWise USA program has been in existence since the early 2000s. And the DNR has a liaison for our state to manage that program statewide. So my boss, Guy Gifford, is the statewide liaison for that. Those duties are delegated to me for the state. And in this area locally, FireWise USA communities, they pop up, they're active, they dwindle, they become less active. And in recent years, there's been more support from local partners in this room, from Cascadia, Lake Wenatchee Fire and Rescue, Fire District 3, Service Forestry, to get out in the communities and back those communities up and be present with them. Whereas a few years ago, there was somebody in Olympia that you could call, but maybe they wouldn't get back to you, type of deal. So there's a lot more collaboration happening on the ground in the communities through the FireWise USA program. And our program in the DNR Community Resilience developed a micro grant to help support action plans that are developed through the Firewise USA program. So, you know, that grant program is open currently. We try to focus it in the springtime, Wildfire Awareness Month of May, and we give about $4,000 out to communities to help them implement their action plans. And we've seen a lot of good returns on keeping communities engaged with the Firewise USA program and creating more Firewise USA sites. I think that about covers it for me.
Thanks. I'm wondering if maybe Erica or Patrick could share a little bit more about exactly how you're aligning that federal piece of the landscape with the private side of landscape, right? To get to the scale that, you know, Paul spoke to a little bit ago. I mean, it really is, it's, you know, we're looking at the whole picture. And so I'm wondering, you know, we talked about the potential control lines up the Chumstick and through the lake, but then also how that aligns with the Forest Service planning areas and where the Forest Service is planning on working. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about how those efforts have evolved and where you see that work going in the over the next number of years.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I think a big part of that was starting with shared priorities, and so DNRs did a good job with their science team in Olympia, helping us do some analysis, and a lot of that analysis came out of some of Paul's research as well to really hone in on where are the most important places on the landscape to direct investments. And then they brought that research and analysis back to Chelan County, and they pulled together local fire staff from the Forest Service, DNR fire staff, local fire districts, and we all ground truthed that together. And so that has helped give us a map and a shared understanding of here's the most high priority areas in our county. And a lot of those do fall in these, on these kind of lines or linear features that might serve as potential fuel breaks that would have both a benefit to forest health and improve opportunities for wildfire response. So I think that's been a huge thing that's pulled us together. And then we have shared priority watersheds as well based off some of this research that has really helped us all say we're going to focus in these same places and have a big impact at the same time. The Upper Wenatchee is a good example of that. And then that's allowing us to target working with landowners directly next to where the Forest Service is actively doing projects or planning them. And so, yeah, America, you could probably give examples of that.
So another piece, I guess, I was thinking about is just the early coordination, even before we're at the point of having funding to kind of target towards some of that work. And we've got, like you said, shared interest in sort of a basis in science. Some of the, Paul showed a photo. It was one of the many graphics with the Chumstick to Lower Pashastan project area. The DNR has done these landscape evaluations, and that is getting at not just what the forests would need to become more resilient, but layering on that your values around private lands and as well as integrating sort of the risk of fire spread across the landscape. And so like that really highlights kind of the hot spots, which, you know, intuitively makes sense around private land and other land ownerships and communities, and you start to find those linear features to kind of hone in on that way, in addition to sort of the natural breaks in the landscape that would be able to, you know, slow fire down. And so that's, you know, we kind of have that basis to start with, and then also the just the contacts that Cascadia and some of the other partners have, people coming to them wanting to do work, and so we're trying to kind of weave that together in how we're tackling the next, you know, the implementation of those projects.
Are there questions in the audience? Okay, I'll start with Reese and then you. Oh.
Oh, sure. Thanks for being here tonight. Is that working?
Nope. I don't think you could.
You're loud though. Hello.
Oh, yeah,
there we go. Okay. Thanks for the Commissioner and Paul for the insight and you all being here in the Chumstick putting this on tonight. I think since 15, 16 fires, like we're believers that fire's with us through our future and tremendous progress. It's great to hear the Commissioner saying, support relative to momentum forward. Clearly challenges ahead of us. I'm wondering kind of a new dynamic happening in the sense we see the Maui fires, we see right in Lahaina, and we see what's happening in LA and these other places, basically urban complexes, conflagrations happening. We saw what happened in Malden, Spokane, Oregon Gray fires, and so forth. So really, I'm not, that's something for us coming in the sense of how we're engaging in that space. And I think Paul provided a lot of insight in the sense of how we're working in forests and around our forests. And you are all doing great work in the community. I'm just wondering, sorry for the long-winded introduction, but the piece of like who has what role and like what supports you. You do this full time, day in, day out, are working together, but who else in the community and how do we better prepare in the sense and move forward and learn about what's coming our way to reduce the amount of losses about the things we care about. Thank you.
I'll speak to the structure conflagration part. Most of what I do in community resilience is the idea of reducing ember ignitions. Most structures that are lost in wildfire overwhelmingly are lost to little tiny embers that land in an inopportune spot and ignite your structure. And when the local resources are stretched thin and the wind's blowing, it only takes 1, 2, 3 structures to get going, and it's unmanageable for the resources. So the home assessment program that all the agencies in the room have can really help you understand your risk with your structures and reduce your risk by taking action. The most important thing is the 5 feet around your home, spreading out to 30 feet around your home, and then to 100 feet around your home. Beyond that, that's where the forest management comes into play. But speaking specifically to the structures, there are international and national WUI codes. There are statewide coding, things like that for regulation. But voluntarily, there's a lot that a landowner, a homeowner can do to reduce their chance of ember ignitions.
Yeah, I just add to that. I think that the short answer is everyone has a role, and so every landowner who lives in a wildfire-prone environment, even if you live next to an orchard in town. We saw it in the 2015 Sleepy Hollow fires, right? There were still structures that were burning in those types of scenarios. And so it's that work you do right around your home that's what everybody can do. And then elected officials have a role in terms of thinking about these codes and building, and our land managers have a role doing what we're learning from the researchers on the ground and all of that.
All right, I'll provide one answer here before we go to the next question. So yes, everyone does have that role, but I think as number one tonight, you showed up here today, and so those steps to come and get this advice from professionals and from our great speakers that we had here today. That's step number one. There's lots of outreach events that do come up that folks can go to and encourage your local community and your neighbors to come to these events as well. Lots of folks are out of the loop on things. They like to come over and live on this side of the state because it is, in my opinion, one of my favorite and most beautiful areas of the state. But the wildfire risk sometimes is that secondary piece that folks are thinking about later on. We do also go through community wildfire protection plans and protection plan updates. And there is opportunities for public comment during those. I believe we just closed that public comment this spring. But those are other great opportunities for folks to get more involved on the landscape level. If you own a home and you're certain that your home has all the home hardening techniques in place and is ready to go, that's amazing. If you do have any questions, our local fire district here does those home assessments. And then finally, just reaching out to, you can contact the county, Cascadia Conservation District, DNR, have a professional forester come out to just give you some free technical advice. And there's also opportunities for financial assistance there as well. So I think by you guys showing up here tonight, you definitely made the first step. So thank you all.
I'll say one thing real quick. One thing that we've tried to do is bring in any other stakeholders. One that I work closely with on the fire marshal for the city of Leavenworth. And I will say that my previous mentor and chief, Dave Nail, was able to get the city to adopt the WUI code. We did that before the county and before a lot of people. And they've also adopted everything except the vegetation management plan. And we've already been in meetings with community development this year. And the director has said that she's going to take the vegetation management to city council to go ahead and codify that as well. And once we do that, again, I'm only fire marshal for the city, but they'll have the entirety of the WUI code, which I haven't really seen anybody else in the state adopt all of it. At the county level, they adopt pieces of it, but other pieces can be difficult. But the city has kind of shown us that they're committed to preparing for this by buying off on those things and accepting our recommendations. And so that's one other entity that we work with that I think deserves some credit for at least trying to work with us and figure out some solutions.
And then, Paul, did you want to? Here's the mic. You can.
Oh, I got to him first. Sorry.
Dueling mics.
So, Reese, there's a really important part of your question that there's great research on right now. Maui, Spain, Portugal, globally right now, people are worried about how to deal with the wildland problem and how to deal with the home and community protection problem. And what's dropped in the last couple of years is it's basically settled science that we can tease apart the wildland fire problem from the home protection and the community protection problem. They literally are different strategies, and there are different effects and influences that are important. So what that basically means is if people with their homes and residences do their homework, right now, wildland firefighters are protecting them. You ask your fire staffs on different forests and districts, but they'll basically tell you 60 to 90% of a project fire is protecting homes because the work was not done at the homes and in the neighborhoods. And that's the point. You can actually tease the community fire problem away from the wildland problem so that wildland firefighters are actually dealing with forest vulnerabilities while communities are dealing with community vulnerabilities. And it's not a guess anymore. If people do their work, communities can live safely as we advance on the wildland space. So for me, that really focuses the intention and the resources of our energy to those different spaces. We shouldn't be looking to wildland firefighters to protect communities. That's an entirely separate job. They have wildlands to work in. Does that make sense? So I think that provides enough clarity as we figure out how to spend our resources about how we constrain the problem and how we change the focus in the wildland and the community space.
And there was
Hey, P, I got to plug something. Right now, we're trying out a program kind of similar to what the PUD does with rebates for doing energy conservation practices. And so we have something just like that for doing retrofits to your home to make them more ember resistant, fire resistant. And so where you can get $600 for doing various practices like taking all that combustible stuff around that 5 feet around your house away and adding a gravel layer around your house. You know, maybe putting new screens over your vents so that embers can't get into your vents. So go ahead and check out Cascadia's website, and that program's just around through June. But you know, it's something we've seen a lot of success with so far, so we're hoping to be able to keep it going into the future.
And I would also just add that if you're a property owner, you know, if you have questions about your house or your property, you know, reach out to DNR or the fire district or Cascadia, and they can come out and do an assessment, get you, you know, everything that Katie said. There was a lady up here with green sweater midway up. She had her.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the issue of, Dr. Hesberg mentioned the importance of broadleaf trees and plants and breaking up the landscape and providing important cooling areas and that sort of thing. And yet there seems to be a little contradiction in the way some of the more extensive riparian areas, unfortunately, a number of them I've noticed around my area have been cleared. And it's in part because the landowners didn't fully realize that these are protected zones, and the riparian woodlands, which are generally cool and damp are an important barrier too for fire and not a fire hazard. So I would hope that in coming months or so, you might try to emphasize that a little bit more to some of the homeowners too. And also cool slopes, north-facing slopes. Those are nice, cool forests, and it seems to me that they're kind of a break in the way fire goes. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll address a little bit of some of those riparian issues, and you are correct, those are protected areas, riparian management zones, where there is in some certain cases where folks can go into those areas and reduce forest fuels and reduce density, and they are usually working with our forest practices office. But you're always welcome to refer folks to reach out to DNR so we can help and assist them so that they are following our Washington State forest practices laws.
I think one important thing that we can do there is look to the beavers that Paul mentioned and how the great engineering work that they did to create meadows and connected floodplains historically. And so we're doing that throughout the Chumstick. We're trying to recreate the work that beavers do, and that's really probably one of the best things that a landowner can do to their riparian area, because I go do site visits all the time. People say, I want to cut that all back, and I'm like, well, it's kind of a waste of your time because it's going to come right back, for one. For two, it's not a very susceptible fuel type, these nice hardwood shrubs and trees, and there's better ways to do it. We can try and keep the water here in this stream longer, create a meadow, create beaver dams, and then we're going to keep that fuel with a higher moisture content deeper into the fire season. We're going to create more humidity there, all these things that help moderate fire behavior. And so there's great research coming out about that and examples up in the Met Howe where areas that burned with beaver dams in them had 3 times more fire refugia where they were unburned. And so if you pay attention driving up and down the Chumstick or Eagle Creek, you'll see these little posts all over, and they're being weaved together with branches that were taken from our forestry projects, putting wood right in the creek. And yeah, there's miles of it that we've already done in the Chumstick. And that's also about drought resilience, right? And salmon habitat, so there's multiple benefits there.
Really, it's education. So you need to get someone from Cascadia or DNR Service Forestry to your property and help educate what's going on there.
Is that John?
Yeah, I'm wondering if anyone is working to promote the planting of broadleaf, hardwoods, trees and shrubs in yards as an alternative to conifers. Driving in here today, I was struck by how many people have left these screens of conifers, which are wicks for fire, when they could be creating beauty and privacy through the use of hardwoods. And it's not just Leavenworth. I was looking out over East Wenatchee a week ago and thought, my God, this is just set up to burn all these huge, huge conifers right up against houses, all these arborvitae hedges. What I don't see is an effort to get people to understand how they can create privacy and beauty with hardwoods. And the nursery trade is pumping out all these conifer trees, which are just future fire material. And I'm wondering if anybody's working on this problem to get a shift from just planting conifers everywhere in your yard to using hardwoods much more extensively.
Well, first resource that comes to mind is a collaboration through the Master Gardeners, WSU, Forestry Extension, and DNR to develop an Eastern Washington plant guide on fire-resistant plants. And that has hardwoods, lilacs, other things that are better than arborvitae in it. There's also in the works, almost completed, a Western Washington plant guide of fire-resistant plants. So that's one resource that can help educate people on the proper plants to put in a fire environment in a community to help. There's some pilot programs on hazardous fuel reduction that promote the right materials to be purchased from a nursery and installed. But again, it's pilot programs at various locations throughout the state. But in general, in the communities, it is a focus on getting the right plants in the communities. Now, I can't speak to landscape level. The DNR does have a urban forestry program. It's a small program, but they do help make sure that there's the right trees planted in cities that are maintained and that kind of thing. So it is happening. It's just on a smaller scale than you might see with some of the other programs. But yeah, Home Depot keeps humping out those arborvitae, don't they? So.
Yeah, the Conservation District just also received a grant from FEMA to do 3 years of courses or kind of work, like one-night workshop type things. And so those will be focused on landscape contractors, builders, real estate developers, landscape architects. And so that's going to be all about kind of educating the people, a lot of the folks that are designing landscapes and implementing them on the best practices, right? And using some of these resources that have already been developed. And I think one of the great things about that too is we're going to do the landscape. We're going to have all of those available in Spanish only as well, and they'll be all throughout the county. And so, yeah, we'll see how that goes, but we'll be kicking those off those will happen in the winter when folks are a little slower with their work.
We have time for just one or two more. You, sir, I think, yeah.
You speak quite a bit about collaboration, and especially as we move into this coming summer, as we've had many. Oh, thanks. Got the Mr. Microphone. As we move into this summer, and over the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen Chelan County commissioners be quite aggressive with their fire canceling as far as open flame goes. However, there seems to be quite a bit of confusion coming out of the fire, primarily the Forest Service, on having open fire or not. And this affects a lot of us in the immediate area of Chelan County and specifically Leavenworth with a high recreation and so forth. And I'm trying to get an understanding, perhaps from Mike and from Erica, kind of who's on first and who's on second and who's on third to handle this, because it's certainly very confusing to us residents, especially that are trying to monitor areas right above us, right here in Leavenworth. Thank you.
So for the fire district, any property that's annexed that's in our fire district, the North Central Washington Chiefs Association normally meet in May to determine, do we want to go with the June, normally it's June 1st to October 1st. We try to stick with that schedule, but if we find that it's extra wet or that we have cooler weather, if we can extend that burn window for people, we will do that. But we make the decision for private properties that we protect, and normally I'll let the Forest Service speak to it, but normally they do the fire restrictions for their areas.
I'll just acknowledge it is confusing, and I know there's a lot of confusion just with the general public recreating on whose land base they're on. They may have different rules on different land bases. We do our best in the Forest Service to coordinate with other agencies, but we do have a set of basically severity indices that we're tracking, and then when we start to reach certain thresholds for potential fire danger, we start talking about it as a forest, that we have criteria we go through to decide whether we're going to move into restrictions. And we just have two levels of restrictions, but and we do have these interagency meetings to kind of try to get on the same page, but it doesn't, different agencies have different mandates and different types of fuels, and so they may not always reach that threshold at the same time as we're identifying that threshold. But we can definitely work on how we're communicating that. And also, I think we're doing a really good job right now, in terms of social media posting about, you may find it's different on different agencies, so make sure you're checking this website and this website, and we have kind of a lot of the shared platforms to be able to share that information. But yeah, I hear you that it's not kind of in sync across all agencies, but we try to be as close as we can.
Erica, can you make the decision in this county for this area, or do you have to go back to Portland?
It's up the chain, and we have a forest fire leadership team, and then the forest leadership team is all the rangers across the forest, and the forest supervisor ultimately makes the decision for the forest on whether we're moving into the next stage of restrictions. But she hears from all of the districts on how much they're seeing concerns or problems with campfires, or kind of the on the ground kind of validation of what the indices are telling us.
Yeah, it's confusing when you're driving down Blewett in the middle of July and you see bundles of firewood for sale and there's countywide burn restrictions. I'm like,
right.
The point is the fact that in Chelan County, one of the largest in the state, the county itself, and your department has 80% of the land in this county.
Yeah, but the commissioners of our county can override with the proclamation at the county level.
That's not been my understanding. The Forest Service came back to us and said when it came to forest fires or campfires within a 10-mile radius, the county commissioners had the county the commissioners put out that can, no open flame, and yet we had campfires within a 5-mile radius of Leavenworth.
On national forest, yeah.
So who's on first and who's on second?
The federal lands, we have to decide on Forest Service lands, and we don't go by the county restrictions, but often we're hitting those thresholds at the same time as, there's usually a blanket June 1st for the county, and we're not using the same system. So,
well, I think there's a lot of opportunity to better understand this from outreach.
Sure.
So
yeah.
We'll make a note. And then this gentleman up top.
It's for me? Or you? Go ahead.
He was just passing it on to me. We've heard a lot about putting fires out and how to reduce the risk of fires, but we're also in a unique situation where we're starting to put fire back on the land. And I'm hoping to hear a little bit from what the vision is on collaborating as agencies to support private landowners to make it easier to have prescribed fires back on the land.
I'll speak to a little bit when you talk about what does that final plan look like. I think what Paul described earlier, right? That's we get the mechanical thinning done, reduce the hazardous fuels, and then that's where the Cascadia Burn Association kind of comes in. They can help those private landowners do that prescribed fire once that property is ready for it. And ultimately, in a holistic view, that's what's going to happen in perpetuity, especially to maintain properties once they've been thinned and we've reduced those fuels. You can return that interval of fire like he was talking about and continue to maintain those properties. So holistically right now, as the fire district, we're still kind of focused on hazardous fuels. Luckily, the DNR is supportive, and they passed the law for the Burn Association. So that resource is there right now, and I think eventually, as our capacity increases because the fuel has decreased, which is probably decades away, we could definitely we try to support Cascadia when we can. We run water to them and things like that. But it's hard. We have a duty crew that's on all the time, and I can't, if I commit them to go help with the burn and someone has a heart attack, they're delayed getting to that. So as time goes on, I think we would like to support and have a different role, but right now I think it's clear that Cascadia handles the prescribed fire on private property, and we're working on the hazardous fuels and defensible space. And I'll let Pat maybe have more on.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. So the Cascadia Prescribed Burn Association, they had a table out there, and while they're connected to the Conservation District, it really is the idea is to be a grassroots, community-driven group of volunteers and professionals working together to make prescribed burning available to private landowners who are ready. Right now, we've seen some great success early on with this being their first year. But a lot of it's really about training, educating, getting people aware, getting that social acceptance for prescribed fire and smoke. And then we see like maybe the biggest opportunity with that is to coordinate with the Forest Service in the future for burning that happens across boundaries. And so if you think about the Chumstick watershed, for example, you've got private land all in the valley bottom and these mid-slope property lines that turn to Forest Service, basically up to the ridge line, up and down that watershed. And so as we get all this, so many private landowners are doing great work, doing fuels reduction, thinning, piling, burning those piles. And we took the commissioner up the Grove just today to go see a site that the folks had done that 15 years ago. Now they needed to maintain that treatment, and they did it using prescribed fire. And so if we can set private land up so that when the Forest Service is ready to burn that piece up the ridge, they can actually work with the private landowners in some cases to start in folks' driveway and burn from the driveway up to the ridge. It's not always, it doesn't always work that easily, but I think that's the long-term
with
vision.
agreements, yeah, we can, yeah.
I'll just take a second to plug some things from DNR right now. We are lucky enough to have our prescribed fire program manager in the audience, so I just wanted to point out Jeff Dimke's here. And Jeff, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so we have the certified burn program manager, which you go through, you have to be certified, which then gives you liability coverage and also allows you exemptions to some of the burn process, but it requires you to use a burn plan and use normal science and technology to implement those. So that also gives you, like getting a permit or smoke approval, there's ways and tools to allow you to burn when there's windows where we don't have smoke or fire bans, but you still have to follow your local jurisdictional process. We also support the PBAs, we provide burn trailers, we fund learn and burns, we have treks, we have other opportunities where we're trying to get those grassroots efforts of prescribed fire back to the communities. And so that's what our in-cost boundary project like Mason and Chumstick LP and our participation in this technology and science and those programs, that's where we've been putting our emphasis in funding TNC and Mars and Chelan counties develop. Those are the pieces that we're trying to bring to the community and help prescribed fire move forward. And our biggest focus and our biggest growth has actually been the grassroots with the PBAs and those learn and burns and other opportunities where people have the experience and get the experience so they can start to become practitioners in fire. And that's where we're trying to move things forward. And if you have anything else, you can go to the DNR website for prescribed fire. Just type in DNR prescribed fire and we'll pop up if you have more questions.
Great. I think we have one more question.
Wildfire situation in the forest is well understood, and this whole presentation has been great for addressing that problem. And Paul just brought up the fact that the community devastation that occurs in our communities are the ember strikes that go to the buildings, which is a separate incident from the wildfire situation when a situation is addressed. And we've also touched on the fact that we are overstressed with the response resources when we do have a big wildfire that's threatening a community. And my question is there any avenues of education or preparedness that a private person can engage in with the new programs that maybe are coming on that would address their capacity to defend their own piece of property during a wildfire incident safely, so that they can extinguish those embers that are driven from the wildfire to their residence and be on site to eliminate that one ember start and separate the two fire incidences. The new programs that are coming on board, this is like back in Australia where they had the defense, you stand and defend your own property. Is there any programs in the works in our communities that are going to try and help private property people learn about how to defend their own private property?
I think as a whole, most properties are not ready to have a landowner stay and defend. There's much work that needs done first before the property is defensible. So, you know, the term defensible space has been used for years, and the home ignition zones, that's 5 feet around your home, out to 30 feet, from 30 feet out to 100 feet. Those areas need to be maintained and cared for first before it would be feasible for a landowner to stay safely to defend their home, to spit on those embers. So most of the programs that are available now focus on all that work that needs done first before people can start focusing on suppression. There are many people in this area that have contacted me about just what you're asking about, and I start, you know, telling them about the defensible space, home ignition zones, and they stop me and they tell me they've done all that. And it's very few and far between that you actually go and meet with a landowner that has done all the work, absolutely everything they can, to reduce their levels of risk to where it's safe enough to stay and defend. So most landowners aren't ready for that, and there's not a lot of programs that are available. There are grant programs where folks can buy, you know, equipment to help them out around their home. But I think the best thing you can do is work on the 5 feet around your home, the home itself, out to 30 feet, out to 100 feet, and then become a volunteer firefighter in your local community.
That's exactly what I was going to stop you at. Once somebody has done all that, they do have a space. Are there any programs that would recommend, for example, staging water sources on your property? For example, a fire shelter where you can have a safe zone where you know where to evacuate to. For example, personal protection gear for when the smokes and the radiant heat intensity gets intense, because I've been in a lot of wildfires, and that's a critical issue.
There's a lot that touches on that in the most recent update of the community or county wildfire protection plan. So there is stuff in the works for water tanks to be stationed throughout the community, where there's safe areas to go, evacuation routes, all that stuff is happening. It's just, we got to get engaged with everybody.
I will say, from a fire service standpoint, we operate off of the risk a little to save a little, risk a lot to save a lot. Our main priority is always going to be life safety. So I would say you do the work ahead of time and you prepare, and then the best thing for us is for you guys not to be there. You know, anything can go wrong if you have a medical emergency, if you get burned or something like that. Can we get resources there? We don't know. There's a lot going on during initial attack, and it is very hectic, and there's a lot going on, and so you have the right to fight in Washington State. The sheriff's office will not make you leave, but once you've had the opportunity to evacuate, it's going to be difficult for me to send my crews into a situation where they could be killed to try to see if we can even get in there. And that's my concern, is that if someone stays, their property might be great, but if you get a large-scale fire all around them, there's no guarantees. And so, you know, when that fire is burning, when it's surrounding the road getting in there, we're not going to be able to get in there to help you. And, you know, we unfortunately also don't have a way, like you don't have a radio to communicate, so we couldn't even really get you air on there unless we knew what was going on. So for us, you know, the default is like, please just evacuate.
Well, I think the night has come to an end. I'd like to thank our panelists for their great presentation.
And thank you, Pete. And thank all the folks outside with all the information. One thing that there was a fair amount of talk tonight about the riparian zone, the beaver dam analogs. That is really neat stuff, and a lot of it's I see happening up on Eagle Creek, and those are sure good barriers. So Anyway, that's it for this evening. Thank you very much for coming, and be fire wise.